Hey Art, how's it going?
Doing well, yourself?
Doing good. NAB is over. Now we're back at it.
Yes, that's for certain. It was fun though. NAB was fun. It was really good to see.
Yeah, and it was really good to see you in person. Now we're back at it doing the webinars. But yeah, Art, thank you so much for being live today. Uh, we're always excited to have ambassadors and other influencers present for BenQ. But you in particular, you're a special treat. So we're really glad to have you on today, and I'm excited for uh, today's webinar on getting the most accurate color from your PD display. And take it away, Art.
All right, perfect. Thank you, Ali. So, thank you for taking your time out to join the program wherever you are in the world. In general, it's always a treat to be presenting about color control, color management. This is something that I find very intriguing and fun. So what I'll be doing today is giving us a live walkthrough for color management, how to go in and profile your PD display. The one that I have with me, this is PD 2706UA. This is the one with the ergo arm. It is the one that I can just easily swing out, and you can see the ergo arm right there on the screen. So this is the one that is pretty much a desk mount, and we're going to be using this one to do the demo. Now, as far as calibration device go, if you already have a device, I would just say stick with the one that you have, unless that device is really old or the software is really old, then you might want to consider upgrading. Now, the device I'll be using to run the profiling today would be the Calibrate Color Checker Display Plus, and this is pretty much what the device looks like. Hopefully my camera will focus on that. You can see that. But anyway, I'm also a Calibrate ambassador as well, just so you know about that. But from an engineering standpoint, I can tell you right now that based on like almost 2 decades of working with color management, color control, Calibrate is running on X-ray technology, and they pretty much corner the market on good sensor, good calibration techs in general. I also want to mention too that if any of you have any questions, do leave them in the chat pod. I know Ali is monitoring them. I am going to look at the questions throughout the presentation as well. So if you have any questions that are extremely relevant to what we're talking about, we're going to address them right away. If not, we may save some time. We're going to answer those questions at the end. The other device that you can also consider as well, this is the Color Checker Display Pro, or Calibrate Color Checker Display Pro. Let me rephrase that. There we go. That's kind of what it looks like. These are colorimeters, and they work really well for display calibration. They're generally the one that I recommend. All right, so you just got your BenQ PD display. Some of you may have calibrated already. Some of you may have not yet to go through all the process. And the one thing that I want to address first that a lot of people always tell me is that these are factory calibrated. So why do I need to run a calibration again? Well, to really answer that question, all displays are calibrated from the factory. The problem is that at the factory, everything is being output at reference value. The thing is that our computer and every single one of our computers are outputting signals slightly differently. The other thing that you may not know as well is that every single connection cable you use, whether that is USB-C, HDMI, or DisplayPort, sends the signal out differently. So obviously there's a lot of adaptation in the signal. The other thing is our computer operating system, drivers, and everything will change the way how the color are being rendered. And this is what's causing some of the colors to not be as accurate on the display. So yes, even though these are factory calibrated and they look great out of the box, if you want the most precision possible, we need to go in and calibrate and profile our display. Now, with that being said, I'm going to cover this for both Mac and PC. The demo, though, is going to be a little bit more Mac-centric, a little bit more Mac heavy. On the PC side of things, I would say it's a little bit easier in some sense. So first of all, what I'm going to say is there are definitely settings to turn off on your Mac before you start the calibration. And by the way, the software that I'll be demoing today, this would be Calibrate Profiler software. This is the latest software from Calibrate. It is the centralized software going forward to run profiling and calibrate your display. But we're going to talk about that in just a moment. Before we get on to all these calibration, what I want to really touch on is Calibrate Profiler. This is talking about PD display. These are great. You can use the method I'm about to share with you on any other BenQ display line or any other software calibrated display for that matter. However, if you have a hardware calibrated display such as BenQ SW display, well, you can run the calibration using these methods, but you're going to be better off using Palette Master Element software to run the calibration, because that BenQ software will talk directly with the hardware inside the display and will do all the color adjustment at the hardware level. And what it really comes down to when you have a hardware calibrated display is like buying an expensive sport car like a Ferrari. You want to be able to just take it on the road and drive it at full speed and so forth. If you use, for example, Calibrate software on a hardware calibrated display, it can be done, but it's like keeping a car in first gear in 10 miles and driving it in 10 miles per hour all the time. You don't want to do that. All right. So back into the calibration part. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do before we start the calibration process is plug in everything and leave the display running for at least about 15 to 20 minutes. This way, the display, the backlight, has the opportunity to warm up and stabilize. Amazingly enough, we think that we're in the age of LED backlight and we don't really need to do that anymore. The reality is that we still should do that, because LED, even though they're instant and it comes up to that almost that brightness that we set right away, it does still take a little bit of time to stabilize. So it's important to leave your display on. The other thing I also want to tell you as well is consider your connection type as well. Because PD displays and majority of other displays out there are software calibration only, the cable that you use to link the signal up to the display, to the computer, is going to be less of an issue. For example, HDMI will most likely work, where on a hardware calibrated display, HDMI may show some issues because HDMI, it's really a consumer standard for television, and it has a tendency to truncate the signal a lot of times. So, but those are just some of the side note things I want to share with you and have you think about. All right. Now, before we get into the calibration, after we warm up the display, there are settings that we need to address on our computer, and these are important settings to consider. Now, with macOS, this setting dialogues have changed a few times in the last 3 major OS releases. So Ventura looks totally different than what you're seeing on the screen right now. What I am going to do is walk you through these settings on macOS Monterey. And if you want to see more of the guide on which setting to turn off and so forth, I have YouTube video made specifically for each operating system and each user interface that you can definitely check those out. And I'll also share with you my contact information at the end too, and links to my YouTube channel. If you have any questions about this, you can also find me online afterwards too. All right, so let me share my screen. And now you should be able to see my screen coming up right there. So the first thing I tell anyone who's using a Mac to go in to do is to System Preferences, or in Ventura, the latest version of macOS is now called System Settings. We're going to go into Display. Now in Display, again in Ventura, this is going to look different, but for now we're going to use Monterey, and I'm going to click on Display Setting. Now, in this dialog that you see right now, there are certain settings we need to turn off, and I already have these turned off. And another thing I also want to note as well is that this display is linked up to my MacBook Pro right now, which is a 16-inch with the M1 Max chip on the inside. The exact computer that you have a link up to will not matter much, but if you have any Mac laptop for that matter, you're going to see an option that has, for example, automatically adjust brightness and true tone. Automatically adjust brightness is something that I always recommend disabling right away. This way your computer is not constantly changing the brightness of a screen as you move to different environment. Because we're doing this for pro workflow, we want to get the most accurate color possible. We want to keep everything fixed. Automatic adjust brightness will only affect built-in displays, for example, on a laptop screen, but it won't really affect external displays such as a BenQ that you link up to it. However, the next thing that I'm going to talk about, and like I said, this will only show up on, for example, iMac and laptop computers that has display built in with also a webcam. If, for instance, you have a Mac Mini or Mac Studio, those would be the standalone desktop Mac without any displays, you won't have the option for True Tone. So if it doesn't show up, don't worry about it. There's no need to panic. You don't even need to think about that at all. But if it's there, True Tone, this is the one here, you want to turn it off, because the moment I check on that, the display is going to change color slightly, and it's going to constantly change color with the environment. The issue with True Tone is that it doesn't just affect the built-in display on the iMac or the laptop, it will also affect any external display linked up to the Mac as well. And you don't want that to happen, especially when you're running color calibration, when you're doing color precision workflow. You want it to be as fixed as possible without any changes. And that is the reason why we go in and we disable True Tone. Now, as you may notice right now, I have the Mac built-in Retina XDR display selected, and that's where the True Tone is going to be. If I click on the BenQ one, there's not a lot of options for me to look at. I already gone in and profiled this display, which is the reason why my profiles show up. But you have a lot of options here as well, such as scaling the resolution if you want to. You can change the refresh rate. You can also set it to high dynamic range. Now, this is another thing to note about BenQ displays or any other displays you link up to the system that has the capability for HDR. If it does, you want to go in and be certain that HDR high dynamic range is off before you start the calibration process, because you want to calibrate it in the correct color gamut that you want to use. And high dynamic range, there's really no consumer solutions right now to really calibrate for that properly. Okay, with that in mind, we're going to go back. I'm going to press on done and go back to the main screen. Now, the next thing I recommend going in to check is under desktop and screensaver. And again, like I said, in Ventura, this is going to change a little bit. Now, mine shows up in two different screens right now because this PD display is a secondary screen on my system. So for this, what I'm simply going to do is not really worry about that, but I'm going to focus on the main tab right there. So there's a desktop and there's screensaver. Now, screensaver, I already have disabled this on mine as well. By default, Mac will have this box checked, and it will, automatically come on after 20 minutes of mouse and keyboard being idle. I recommend turning this off. This way, if your calibration runs longer, screensaver doesn't pop up in the middle of the calibration, ruining the calibration result. All right, and we're going to change one more setting on the machine, and that is under battery. Obviously, as I've said this before in multiple disclaimers, Ventura, the settings are all in different places, and I've aggregated a video on that. So I would highly recommend watching that. But the principle that I'm sharing are going to be the same. So under battery, we're going to look on the left side, the battery itself. If you're running under battery, I usually have my display turn off time after 1 hour anyway, just in case we lose power. The other thing too, when we run the display on battery, I always uncheck this option, slightly dim display while on battery power. The reason why I do this is because if I set the display to 80 nits of brightness, I want it to remain the same. I don't want it, the display to change the brightness, whatever. This mostly has to do with the built-in display on a laptop device, but it's just something that I'm adding as an extra tip for you Mac users out there. And the other tab that's going to be more important will be on battery power, and this applies to most Macs in this situation. I have this turn all the way up to never. You can change this to never, go back and reset it to whatever timing you want. But by default, Mac has the display turn off after like about 1 or 2 minutes. That's way too short. That means you're not going to finish the calibration before your display goes into sleep mode again. And that's also not good, because then you never really have the opportunity to warm up your display properly. So if you want to make sure your display warm up properly, I highly recommend putting this at a high amount of hour. You can do 1, you can do 2 hours to start out with, and afterwards you can change this to the preference that you like. All right, so that covers some of the system settings. Now, if you're on a PC side of things, there's a few settings you need to turn off as well. Make sure that HDR is not turned on. And the other thing, one more important thing that I forgot to mention here is that I have 2 displays right now because I have my laptop in front of me, which you don't really see. You do see a little bit of the corner of it at the bottom left of your screen, but we're not going to worry about that too much. And I also have this display. The other thing that you're going to notice in my display setting is that these 2 displays are set as extended desktop, meaning that they're running independently and they're extending each other. If you set this to mirror, that's not going to work for display calibration. You want to run it, you want to have your display set up and extended for the calibration to work. All right, so that covers a basic of software. Let's see, there's one question that comes in. I'm going to see what the question, oh, okay. We're going to talk about the question that come in later on. So the next thing, what we're going to do, can we go in and calibrate this right away? Yes, we can. But there's one key, crucial, important thing that not a lot of people talk about. And because you're here, you're going to learn so much from this. So on your display, on your PD, you can use either the hotkey puck or the joystick on the back of it. I'm going to go into the display menu. And what I'm going to do now is I will disable my screen share for just a moment. And let's see if I can make this a little bit larger. You may not be able to see everything on my screen clearly, but I'm going to give you some key phrases to look for when you go through the display menu that will make a lot of sense. So I already touched the joystick, or the little 5-way joystick on the back of the display. I'm going to go into the menu, so I'm going to push this direction. Now in this menu, there's a lot of options. These are going to be very similar to majority of PD displays out there and many other BenQ's displays as well. But if you're using another brand, this will also work as well too. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to come down to color. And in color, what we're going to do is we're going to go into color mode. This is crucial because these are the factory calibrated color gamut. And if you want to use the display, for instance, in sRGB, you want to go in and choose sRGB before you do any type of work, before you run a display calibration or profiling. This is going to be crucial and extremely important. If you want to run it in display P3, you would set it there. DCI P3. And for those of you that may be wondering, what's the difference between display P3 and DCI P3 and which one should I use? Because everyone keeps just using the term P3 without specifying whether it's display or DCI. Because you have a display, majority of the work that you're going to do are going to be for display, content consumption like on phone. My recommendation is to set this to display P3 because that's going to be the best color gamut you're going to use. Now, you may wonder what DCI P3 is for. DCI P3 stands for digital cinema. So if you are, for example, doing some work for a digital cinema that may have a slightly dimmer and a different white point, it's actually a 6300 Kelvin instead of 65, you would set it to DCI P3. But for a majority of your work that you do, including video, I recommend just leaving it display P3. Now, there's other color modes on these BenQ displays as well, such as Rec 709. If you do video, you can set it to that. There's MBook, which is a color gamut that's fine-tuned to look as close as possible to your MacBook Pro or any Apple laptop or screen devices that you have. There's a CAD/CAM mode, animation, and blue light. So there's all these different modes you can choose and use, and there's also a user mode as well. Now, user mode on majority of the displays are going to mimic the largest color gamut that the display can show, which for example, in most PD displays, that is going to be P3 or display P3. See, I'm even ambiguous about my P3 conversation. All right, so right now what we're going to do is we're going to calibrate this display in display P3 color gamut. Okay, and this is, by the way, the only way how you can choose a color gamut that you want to work in on a software calibrate display. If you have a BenQ SW, you can simply click that from a drop-down menu, choose the color gamut, and the program will automatically talk to the built-in hardware in the display. But because these are PD, they're software calibration, there's really no hardware communication, even though I might have a device here. This is really only for measuring the value. It doesn't talk with the display. So hopefully we're a little bit more clear on that one. All right. So now what I'm going to do is I will pull back up Calibrate Profiler. And with that, I'm going to resume my screen share. Now, Calibrate Profiler is Calibrate latest software. And if you're unfamiliar with Calibrate, pretty much it's the similar company as X-Rite. X-Rite have decided to move their consumer product portfolio to Calibrate, made the transition about 2 years ago. And the device and everything are very similar. They're just been rebranded as a Calibrate device. It's always on the bottom, says powered by X-Rite. Now, with Calibrate Profiler, you can still use X-Rite devices. For example, if you have an i1 Display Pro, it will work. However, there is a one-time $9.99 upgrade fee. That's just something to be aware of. But if you have a Calibrate already, it will work right away. Simply enough, I have this program launched. What you can even do if you want to is just go into basic mode, just like so, and just run the calibration in basic. So what I'm going to do is just do a few clicks to show you what basic mode looks like. I'll click on next in basic right now. And obviously Calibrate jumps to the other display. So what I need to do is select BenQ first. And for BenQ displays, any PD displays or a majority of other BenQ displays, what you want to use for backlight technology is RGB LED. That is the backlight technology that they use in all of these displays. Once you have the display selected, the backlight, the next thing to choose is to pick what you want to match it to. Are you doing photos? Are you doing pre-press work, CMYK, video work? And you can also do custom presets as well. One thing I want to point out about this program is that in this basic mode, you have a few options that are available. For example, white balance you want to use, or white point that you want to use to calibrate the display, not white balance, and also the luminance. However, contrast, gamma curve, all these other things, ICC profile, version, how many patches, those are all locked out right now. See how they're grayed out? Even though I'm like moving over them, they're just all grayed out, and these are the ones that are not. I can click on next right now, select color checker display plus, and click on start measurement. I'll click on continue one more time, and this will pretty much take me to the calibration screen. I just have to follow the instructions. But what I'm going to do is walk us through a little bit more granular control. Let's say we want to change more things than this. So what I'll do first is start back at the home screen again, and I am going to choose advanced, which is always what I do in my tutorial videos on YouTube anyway. So by the way, if you want to watch this in extended detail, pause whenever you like. I have Calibrate Profiler guide on YouTube already. It's only for one display right now, and it doesn't talk about any specific display type or anything like that, but it gives you an idea of how to walk through the program and a pretty good guide and walkthrough. I'll probably be developing extensive program very similar to what I did with i1 Profiler software for each specific computer type as we go forward into the future. All right, so I am now in advanced mode, and what I'm simply going to do is click on next. I will choose the BenQ PD display, RGB LED. Now, by the way, the default for this is always going to be white LED because that's the one that tends to work with most of the displays. However, you want to get the best result possible, RGB LED for BenQ displays is going to be best. Now, I'm going to choose the target as photo for my starting point, and I'll click on photos right there. And notice how in advanced mode, all these are not grayed out anymore. See how they're all white, and you go and select them. So what I do is I'll start with the white point. For this, because I'm not doing any CMYK pre-press printing work, I'm going to use D65 as a white point. You can also go and customize this as well. So there's a D50, D65 default, and you can also customize this. For luminance, you can choose, for example, 100, 120, or you can go to custom. For instance, I like my display a little bit darker, especially when I edit for print work. Normally, I set my luminance to 180, but for this calibration, what I'm going to do is I'm going to stick to a 100 or just a 100 nits or 100 candela calibration for the time being. A good range, by the way, for any type of work, and this would include printing, design, video work, and I said yes, video work, so pretty much any type of work. It's always a good idea to calibrate your display within a certain acceptable range. That range I found is best between 80 to 120 nits. And by the way, if it's like 85, you're not really going to see that 5 nits or 5 candela difference. When you go from 80 to 90, you'll notice some changes, or 90 to 100, you're going to notice some of the changes. So around 10 nits is when our eyes really start to see the variation. If it's only a few nits or like 5 nits, we're not really going to see that much variations at all. So like I said, I'm going to do 100, and again, that range is 80 to 120. Now, I've heard some people use 160 as well, but if you do any type of printing at all, if you print work or even just CMYK, 160 have a tendency to be too bright for that. So what I'm going to do is choose 100 candela for this, or 100 nits, and I will click on next. Now this is going to take me to the next thing right away, which is contrast ratio. For this, I'm going to leave the contrast ratio as native. This means whatever the display can produce with the profile is going to do that. You can certainly come in and choose custom as well. You can do measured, you can do a custom white point. There's different ways how to do this, but for now, we're going to keep it simple and we're going to choose native. As far as gamma, for photo work, or any type of design, 2.2, design work for screens and everything, 2.2 works perfectly. Now, if you should do video work, or if you want to edit video work, if you know, or a content creator, video editors, those kind of things, what you might want to do is click on custom, and you can choose a few things. So one thing that you can choose is custom, and let's say you don't want to use 2.2, let's say you want to use 2.4, you can just simply go on that screen, choose 2.4 and click on save. Now you have the custom gamma set at 2.4. Now, one thing that I will share with you is that, for instance, if you have a color checker display plus and only the plus model can do this, you have the option to choose BT1886. And even though they say this is a gamma curve for HDR video, it is kind of, which conforms really closely to gamma 2.4. So you can certainly choose to use gamma 2.4 or BT1886 as well. The difference between the gamma 2.4 and BT1886 is BT1886 is more logarithmic in nature rather than a fairly flat or less, logarithmic curve of gamma 2.4. All right, for now, because I'm doing for photo, I'm going to stick with 2.2. I know that's a lot of information, so like I said, if you want me to repeat something, do leave them in the chat pod or the comments. Ali will let me know if we need to do anything along those lines. Color profiling options. Thank goodness all of these settings were turned off. For example, ambient light auto adjust. I have that on off all the time. I never recommend that we turn that on, just because, again, I just simply told you at the start of this program, we want to turn off auto brightness. We want to turn off true tone. Why would we turn it on in the program, again, when we're doing calibration, right? So those are off. Flare correction, you can leave that off without any problem. For all these other options, I will leave them at default. I can go and explain them in detail, but the default option works fine, so I'm going to leave it right there for now. Patch option. This is where we have a lot of choice. So you have the standard, you have the standard 118, the advanced of 211, and the advanced plus of 461 plus. The reason why advanced plus is there is because notice when I click on advanced plus, I have the option to add image. Where on advanced, where on the standard, it won't allow me to do that. And on advanced, well, you can still do that too. And advanced plus, you can add from image. So you can drop an image in here. The program is going to create a custom patch for you. But for brevity and, to really concentrate on a program, what I'm simply going to do right now is choose the standard 118. You can choose any 3 of these and they're going to be fine. It's not going to be too many patches. And I can tell you right now, the 461 is going to take a little bit longer. I would say maybe about 8 minutes or so, but it's not the point of diminishing return, meaning that you do way too many and the color doesn't look good anymore. And I've done that before where I tried to measure about like 1,000 patches or something. The profile was just awful, so I don't recommend doing that. But for now, like I said, we'll stick to 118. That's pretty much the last stage. If you take a look up here in our workflow, so we went from contrast ratio to gamma to all the different profile type and the number of patches we want to use. From now, I'll click on next. And now notice a few things. So I have the color checker display plus in green. It says it's active, that's good. And notice how the save preset is in yellow. When you have that circle yellow on there, it just means that, well, you have gone in and customized these settings based on what you want. Do you want to save this? I can certainly click on save preset, and I'm just going to name this one preset name. I'll name this one Art BenQ demo. Normally, I would tell you to go in, for example, instead of doing Art BenQ demo, let me do this the right way, actually. So I'm going to put in, for example, D65, luminance 100, gamma, it's going to be 2.2, or actually native contrast, native G 2.2. And then I'm going to put this one down as standard patch. Standard patches. You can also write notes on here as well. For example, you can name this one Art BenQ Demo and copy it and write what I just actually put down in the preset name in the notes. There's different ways of doing things. Whatever your convention is that works for you, that's perfectly fine. This is something that you don't have to be quite as refined about it. As long as you can come back to it, that's going to be okay. So I'm going to save this out now. Notice how that's already green because I already saved a custom preset. From now, I'll simply click on Start Measurement. Now, it's going to ask you what hardware control you have. So we have the brightness option, RGB, and contrast. Most display, even though on a BenQ display, you do have the contrast control, I never recommend going in to check contrast. Just leave that unchecked and go by the default contrast that comes from the factory on these display. It will work just fine. And this is the reason why we choose native contrast. If we did not choose native contrast, I definitely recommend checking the contrast box right there. This way you can change the contrast value for the display based on what you want. And also these BenQ displays does support RGB calibration, so you can go in and fine tune the red, green, and blue value. Again, this is really advanced calibration. And unless you really have a need for that type of precision on these display, I found that using the factory color mode that has been pre-calibrated, such as display P3, sRGB, Rec 709, tends to work really well on these PD displays without having to do any more work. From here, because I already have brightness automatically selected, I will click on continue. And it is now showing us the guide. Notice how this box on the left-hand side of the screen is now in red with an X. That is because my device, I haven't really opened this up yet. So what I'm going to do is I will actually disable my screen share for just a sec. This way we can see this a little bit larger. Now this is still in red, and this is giving us some guide on how to work and hang the device from the display. I'll cover that in just a moment. The first thing we want to do is we want to pretty much take this. If you have an X-Rite device, what you're going to simply do is, this is normally the orientation, you're going to pull it up or pull it to the side, and you're just simply going to rotate. You can see that right there. I'm just going to rotate this and have this go towards the back of the device. Now, the other thing I also want to point out is that this thing is a counterweight. And the counterweight, I have a Velcro on here, but the counterweight you can simply press and just slide the cable in and out. You don't have to pull it. It doesn't take any pressure at all. And this way, you're not going to damage the cable too. Now, another thing that what I'm going to do is, instead of just hanging it on the display the way how I have right now, which, you know, you can see the device is pretty much, I would just fall off the display right there. That's not good. What you want to do with your display, and I'll turn this to the side a little bit more so you can see a little bit of profile, you want to have the display angled like this. And the reason why we're doing that is so that this glass reading, so that this opening for the reading will lay flat on the display. Now, another thing I will also mention is that we can calibrate in the bright room like this, and that's perfectly fine. The reason why is because if we take a close look at the device right now, and I'll pull this to the side so we can see a little bit closer, you can see that on the front right there, there's not a lot of reflection material at the moment. These are felt lining, or some may call Alcantara material, but they're just really felt lining. And what they do is they prevent stray light from coming in when you're running the calibration. So what you want to do is hang this on the display like so, and you can always adjust the counterweight so that the device just pretty much sits in the center of the circle like that. So this is angled. Notice though how this is also showing green, and maybe a little bit difficult to see. Well, actually, let's see. There you go. This is now green because I already opened the sensor up, and because I followed the guide on how to, you know, angle the display and everything. What I'm simply going to do right now in the software is click on next. And in this screen, what we're going to see, this is the one where we have to go in and choose the brightness level. My display right now is showing a luminance of 109. And let me share my screen one more time. This way you get a chance to see. So you can see the bar there. See how the bar is, the green bar is just above that level where I want it to be. It's showing that the measured white value is 109. I want this to be 100. So what I'm simply going to do, press the joystick, go into the brightness menu, and I'm just going to pull down the brightness by a little bit. Slowly does it. And I only have to pull down a little bit. By default, it's going to come a little bit higher from the factory. So those are just things to keep in mind. Now, right now I'm hovering between 100, 101, as you saw right now. just something to note, if you don't land exactly, to the point, like if you want 100 and you get 101, it's not the end of the world. If you get 99, it's not the end of the world. However, if you do want 100 and you're at 90, well, you might want to bring it up a little bit. Notice how the screen also showed that there's a check mark, meaning that I have the brightness level where I want it now. So I'm simply just going to come on and click on next. Now this is doing the measurement on the screen. On the very bottom of the display, and I think you still see my picture as well, you will see that it says progress 118 patches of 118 remaining. So it's, oh, here's one thing I keep forgetting to do, is that once you click on the next screen, once it's here, you have to click on start measurement. The funny thing is I also made that blunder on the video that I recorded. I forgot to click on start measurement. So it just shows that white circle. But anyway, you will see that it's actually showing you the color in the progress bar as they're running across. This on the very top corner is giving you the statistic, and this is telling you the progress, counting down the number of patches that you have left on the display. So what I'm going to do is let me disable my screen share for a second. And because this is going to go for like about 118 patches, it's not going to take too long, but I'm going to use this opportunity to answer a question. And Andy has asked us a question: how does the color gamut of the PD display compare with iMacs? I'm on the fence between SW and PD. I am a photographer who prints, so like the Adobe RGB color gamut of the SW, but I also like the KVM of the PD. I am not a professional or a commercial photographer, so maybe an extra gamut is not crucial. Is one or the other better for text-based app? And I'll be using my monitor for a MacBook. So one thing I didn't mention is that this is a 4K display, and I have this link up to my Mac, and it works just fine. So despite what you may have heard that 4K is not compatible with Mac, kind of a wrong information. They are compatible with Mac. I have been using dual 4K display with my Mac for close to a decade now, and they work just fine. So I'll put it that way. So it is compatible with Mac. Now, as far as SW and PD goes, PD display line are going to emphasize the color gamut for most creative in general who don't really print. That means you're going to get a P3 color gamut coverage, and sometimes you'll have, obviously you're going to get the sRGB Rec 709 as well. But if you do print, in general, especially if you print with an inkjet printer, our inkjet printer at home can produce prints, or the color profile for those paper and ink combination is generally larger than sRGB. And because Adobe RGB is designed with CMYK printing color gamut in mind, by the way, even though our inkjet printer at home is using CMYK ink, it's using sRGB translate, or excuse me, is using an RGB translation, but nonetheless, it's still CMYK based ink. And if you're doing any type of those printing at all, inkjet printers or anything, I recommend going with SW all the way. The reason why is because that 99% Adobe RGB color gamut coverage is going to give you a best representation for what you're going to see in your final print. The PD display line is perfect for those that just maybe want to use the display as a photographer, to create content for other display consumption for digital media. That's going to work fine. If you send, images to a lab and have it print with like sRGB color gamut only, I think these are going to be fine. But if you do any type of printing that's a little bit more, I would just use the term fancy in a way, inkjet printers, then I would definitely consider getting the SW instead, because that's going to give you more room and more ability to see colors in the gamut that it can be represented on paper. So hopefully that really answers the question. There's also one more related question. I'm going to take a quick moment to answer this, and then for inkjet printing, what would be the best color space to select on the PD, since it does not have Adobe RGB, which is my typical workspace? It would be the largest color gamut on this display, which is display P3. I made a video on my channel. It's called CMM. It's called Color Management Module. I highly recommend that you check that out, and many of you that may be interested as well. And if you can't find that, you can certainly reach out to me, and I'll help you, send a link to that video. But pretty much what it does is that CMM is a background kind of a module in a computer that does the color gamut translation in real time for different applications. So what you're going to be able to see is, it's going to translate close to the color gamut that you have defined in the program. There's a longer, lengthy explanation of that. I don't want to get too much into that right now. All right. we're going to jump back into the calibration. Now that I've finished this calibration, it says, please remove your device from the display and replace the diffusion or diffuser over the lens. I'm not going to do that right now. What I'm simply going to do is I will just click on next. And part of the reason why is because, actually, I do need to move this to the side a little bit. But part of the reason why is because I want to actually run a validation, because I also want to know how good the calibration is. And I'll talk about that in just a moment. By the way, one thing to know is that the colors you're seeing on the display right now, these are the actual real measured color from the display. So it's actually showing you a live result. I'll click on next and it's asking me to save a profile. So right now, this is BenQ PD 2706UA. That's a good name. Let me share my screen so you can see that a little bit easier. There we go. And for this, what I'm simply going to do is I'll just say this one as a, oops, let's see. I'll just type in demo on this one. And this is where you can also set the reminder how often you want it to remind you to recalibrate your display as well. For any professional application, I would say 2 to 4 weeks is a good time to run the calibration again. The reason why is because, you know, your display, even though these are LCD with LED backlight, they're really stable. They're not going to shift as much. But here's the thing. With any type of electronic, there's always minutia of changes that happens all the time. We may not see it because our eyes are not as sensitive as an instrument like this, but using something like this and doing your calibration or profiling frequently is going to help maintain that color throughout, you know, your workflow. Then this is something that is important. So at the very long, so I would say like 4 weeks is where I would recommend to go in to run a profiling on display again. But because this is a demo, I will click on none and just be a little rebel just for this demo. And I'll click on save. It's going to save my profile. Now, the nice thing about this is once it's saved the profile out, you don't have to do anything. It automatically sets this profile in system preferences or system setting on a Mac and also on PC as well. So let me pull up system preferences and I'll show you that right now. We'll move on to a different screen, which is fine. So I'll go into display setting and I'll click on the MacBook Pro, and you can notice right there how is that is the profile we just created, BenQ PD 2706UA demo.icc. So this is something that you don't even need to think about or worry about it at all. Okay, back to Calibrate Profiler. Another thing that you can do is see the before and after between these two, because you're not going to see a lot of difference on my screen because I have calibrated this display extensively for the review. And by the way, if you haven't seen a review for this display yet, check it out on my YouTube channel because it's a fairly in-depth review for what this display can do. But they have different pictures that you can choose and do a comparison before and after. In fact, you can also add your own picture in as well. You can add up to 3 as a reference. And what you're seeing on the screen right now, those are all, you know, the requirements for a picture that you want to drop in there in case you want to preview your image before and after. Below that, this is profile information. So you can see how the profile compared to like an sRGB, you can see the color is larger. And I'm going to impose P3 on there and take sRGB out. So the profile we're able to get is a little bit smaller than the P3 reference, but this makes sense because this display is 95% P3. If it was 100% P3, we would get that, you know, that blue line, which is our profile, pretty much full, overlapping the red. But because this is 93%, this is a gamut outline that makes absolute perfect sense. All right. Lastly, you can take a look at the curve. Now, because we have select RGB LED at the beginning, this is something that if you want to do it, you can. I'm going to click on the plus here and make this a little bit larger. Notice how for the most part, the tracking red, green, and blue are really close to each other. That's what you want. If you start to see the red, green, and blue really spreading apart, that means you're selecting the incorrect backlight type for your display. So I'm just going to exit Zoom right now. And one thing you're going to notice that at the very bottom there is a blue button called validation. So what I'm going to do is I will click on that. So what I like about Calibrate Profiler, and this is new to Calibrate Profiler, so you can do the Color Checker Classic 24 patches, or you can do the SG 96 patches. The 96 patch is not available on the Color Checker Profiler software, but it is available in Calibrate Profiler. Again, 2 different software. Color Checker Profiler software is the one that comes before this. is the one that looks very similar to I1 Profiler from X-Rite. Calibrate Profiler is this brand new software with the new interface you're seeing right now. For the sake of time and for this conversation, we're going to leave this at 24 patch, and I will click on next. Notice how I still left this on the display. This is one big difference between Calibrate Profiler and Color Checker along with I1 Profiler. Color Checker and I1 Profiler software will force you to take the device off the display, put the cover back on. With this, I don't need to do that. I can just leave the cover just open like that and continue. This is already showing green. I'm good to go. On the left side, my display is already tilted because I never tilted back because I know I'm going to do the validation, and I will click on next. And don't forget to click on start measurement. Otherwise, you're just going to stare at that white dot on the screen. Thank you, Andrew. So Andrew had to leave early, one of my friends who joined the program. Thank you for being here. Anyway, so this is doing the measurement right now and is measuring on the bottom. You can see there. I'm going to take this out from the display for just a second so you can see. Now there's some scaling issues. This is still like a beta software, and when I'm doing the webinar, there's a lot of weird things that this webinar program is doing to my computer scaling, which is the reason why you see the graphic interface look that way, but this is working just fine. So now that I have that done, I'm going to click on next. And with this, let's see if I can actually get this to share. Yeah, should have actually not tried to do too many things when I were doing this. So the screen is now really off. Let me see if I can get this off of full screen. Okay, so I can't get this off of full screen right now, and this is not scaling correctly. So that's very interesting. I'm losing a bit of interface. So let me do one more thing. Let's see if I switch this back. Nope, it's not going to work. I am going to change this to a large scale resolution and see if that improved what you guys are seeing right now a little bit better. Yes. Okay, so we do see a lot more and I can save the report. Okay, so that is good. All right, you are seeing my screen, right? There you go. Perfect. All right, you're seeing a little bit more on the screen. And by the way, what I'm going to do is I'll take the device off the screen right now and put the cover back on because I don't need it anymore. All right. So I'll angle this down a little bit so it's easier for me to see. The average delta E threshold, they have is at 7 and 14. That's way too high. My normal threshold is going to be 2 and 3. So I usually would type in the average would be 2. That would be good. 3 would be the value there. Now, if you're unfamiliar with this, what you want to do is set the average threshold to 2 because anything below 2 is considered good for a display. Anything below 3 is, or excuse me, anything below 2 is considered really excellent. Anything below 3 is considered good. And you want your display to pass on both. For example, max delta E for all the patches right now, I'm getting 1.1. That's really amazing. The average delta E in display P3 for this is 0.5. That is really fantastic. And if you ever want to see the result for this, like later on, you can also click on Save Report there. So this is going to just pretty much save it out. Like you can choose where you want it to go. I'm going to save this as BenQ Demo. I'll save this to the desktop. Click on Save. And on that note, I will click on Finish to which it will take us back to the main screen again. All right. I want to quickly show us what that looks like. So let me launch that up. So this is saved as a PDF, and I'll bring this over to the other display. You can see how it just shows the value and the average and everything. So all the measurement value that we got, the tolerances we set and everything like that is just showing this on the display right now. It's also giving you a lot of values that you may not really care about. Like it's telling you what the RGB target is, the lab, and what the measured for lab value is, along with the UV and the delta E for each color patches. I mean, if you take a look at the delta E for all the 24 color patches that we use for Color Checker Classic chart, all of them are under 1. This is considered really good. So again, we're able to get a really great calibration from this display. All right, I think that is about what I can share for display calibration. Hopefully this, answers a lot of questions, gives us some pretty good ideas for what may be happening. And I don't know if you guys have any questions at all that you want to share or anything like that. I've been combing through the question pod, so I think I answered most of the questions right now already. Oh, by the way, if you want to find me online, let me see here.
And our Linda had a question. I'll read it out to
Yeah.
you. So earlier you had mentioned the pre-checklist before calibrating on what to do in your operating system.
Right.
I think we cut you off when you were going through the Windows or PC settings.
Mm-hmm.
What else should they enable or disable before calibrating on a PC?
So PC, simply enough, you know, even though you may be running on a laptop, I would still look at the brightness level. So I would just disable all the brightness. PC, there's a HDR needs to be disabled and night mode. PCs are a little bit simpler, but I would still check when your computer display is going to turn off and idle and everything. So I would check those settings as well and see where, you know, see where those are. I'm gonna link up to this resource.
It has been a while since I made.
Hold on, this is like not supposed to be playing. So I'm gonna bring this over to the next screen and show you. By the way, if you want to find me online, youtube.com/artistwrite is the best place to find me. And if you, let me see in my videos. You can simply search my channel before. For example, you can see right there, that's the video for, hold on, let me do a screen share. This will be Ventura setting to turn off, Windows display setting to turn off before. And then for Mac, I pretty much have like all different like specific operating system. So you can follow the guide on there in addition to what I'm, you know, sharing with you right now. But the nice thing about watching the video is you can watch the videos on like what I'm showing you, pause it and just compare it side by side. And I can always say too, you may not see all the settings come up right away. Don't be surprised by that. It's perfectly fine. It's not, you know, a big deal or anything like that. Are there any other questions, Lee?
Nothing yet. Let's give another minute. I do have a question. What are your
Sure.
thoughts on the new PD 2706 UA after using it for a couple of weeks?
I really like the display. I really enjoy a lot. Now, because I'm a photographer and I do print on inkjet, I prefer to use the SWU display. But I mean, I'll put it simply this way. If you are a designer for anything for web, anything for digital consumption, if you do, for example, video for YouTube, these are fantastic display for that. And the 26 UA is really nice too because it has 95% P3 color gamut coverage. I mean, you just saw that on our calibration, and we're able to profile this display and get such a low delta E. I mean, that's just fantastic. Now, the other thing that I also really like is the ergo arm. The fact I can just move this around on the desk and everything, it just makes the ease of moving the display around much simpler than just like the desktop one. You don't have that much dexterity on the desktop display versus on the one with like the ergo arm. So that's something that I really enjoy. Now, the only thing I wish is that this ergo arm would be available as an accessory for other BenQ customers and also for one specifically for SWU display, but that's a side note thing that I secretly wish.
Okay, and a couple of more. Paris says an hour well spent. Thank you.
Thank you, appreciate it.
And then here's another question from Michael. What about using Palette Master? You use this instead of your own BenQ monitor. I'm not sure if I'm understanding, but maybe it's a question of PD versus SW calibration.
Yeah, so if you have an SW display, you want to use Palette Master Element. If you have a PD display, I mean, Palette Master Element or PME is really just designed to be used with SW. So with PD, you would still have to use the Calibrate or a data color spider solution. Like I said, if you have a Calibrate already, there's no need to go out and buy a new one. Use the one that you have. If you're looking to get a new one, I recommend Calibrate for a lot of engineering reasons that stands behind it, more so than just brand loyalty. I mean, for me, my personal philosophy is I choose the best product that can produce the best result regardless of brand.
Okay, and then one from Luke. Do you have similar presentations for SW monitors?
I don't, but that's a really great idea. You want to do that, Lee?
Yeah, I mean, I know you have YouTube videos from the past, but yeah, we could do something in a couple of months, we could definitely put on another live webinar using a SW.
Right, and so for right now, I recommend checking out my YouTube videos. I have extensive walkthrough on Palette Master Element that you can use the software and everything. But this is something that we can definitely touch on and go over. I think this would be good.
Okay, Art, here's another one from Jeff. Can I use my Spider 4 to calibrate the PD monitor?
You can, but Spider 4, you run into a few issues. Number one, the software on Spider 4 no longer support modern operating system. Spider just made it a point to stop updating that software, so you're gonna run into compatibility issue. That'll be the first thing. If you can get over that hurdle, the Spider 4 device is using a really old antiquated sensor that's more than a decade old at this point, and it's not really that good of a sensor to start out with what's inside. So if you have a Spider 4, my recommendation is to think about making a one-time leap over to Calibrate, either getting the Color Checker Display Pro or Display Plus. And truth be told, I think the Pro would just do fine for anyone calibrating a PD displays. There's really I don't see the need to get like the Plus model. So that would be my honest opinion about that. For anyone else that may be listening right now, if you have a Spider 5 or a Spider X, regardless of version, those still run just fine. Spider 5 sensor are still not the best in my testing, but they are decent and they'll get the job done at this point in time. And the software, I believe, are still supported with current modern operating system. But just be aware that at some point they may cut that off, and when that cut off comes, you're going to have to look into upgrading, your device.
All right, that looks like the last of the questions. I think that's all. But on behalf of BenQ, thank you so much. Your tips and tricks, your wisdom, being able to take something complicated and speak on the same level to experts, or break it down for beginners or amateurs, or anybody at any level of color management. We truly appreciate that. It's not easy to find this type of information everywhere.
Also, I want to add one more thing as well. I'm typing this in right now for those of you that are still here. Like I said, you can find me on YouTube, and I just put in the my email in the chat pod. It's hello@artisright.com. If you can't find something, you need to reach me afterwards. That will be where you can find me. hello@artisright.com.
And a few more thank yous coming in. We did get one question from Ralph, but Ralph we'll shoot you an email. We'll get that answered for you. But Art, thank you so much for being here today, and we truly appreciate it.
All right, thanks, Ali. Thanks, BenQ.
Thanks, everyone. Have a good night.
Night.